You know you're going to be dropping behind enemy lines into absolute chaos, fighting in extremely tight, brutal close-quarters combat inside the hedgerows of Normandy. You ask the quartermaster for a submachine gun. You're expecting to be handed the legendary, beautiful wood and steel Thompson, the famous Tommy gun that every soldier dreams of carrying. Instead, the quartermaster tosses you what looks like a literal piece of garbage. It's an ugly, grey, stamped metal tube. It rattles when you shake it. It has crude, messy welding marks down the sides. It doesn't have a wooden stock, just a piece of bent wire. It looks absolutely pathetic, like a cheap tool you'd find in a dirty mechanic's garage. In fact, it looks so much like a mechanic's tool that the soldiers immediately insult it, calling it the grease gun. Troops absolutely despised it on sight. They thought the military was sending them to their deaths with a $15 piece of scrap metal. But today, we're going to expose the incredible untold reality of the M3 grease gun. We are going to uncover why the US military desperately needed this ugly piece of plumbing, how its ridiculously slow rate of fire became its greatest, deadliest advantage in a firefight, and how this despised metal tube ended up becoming the ultimate silent assassin for special forces behind enemy lines. To understand why the grease gun even exists, you have to understand the absolute logistical nightmare the United States was facing at the start of World War II. When America entered the fight, their primary submachine gun was the Thompson. The Thompson was an engineering masterpiece. It was meticulously milled out of solid blocks of high-grade steel and fitted with beautiful walnut wood. But there was a massive, fatal problem. The Thompson was insanely expensive, and it took way too long to manufacture. In the 1930s, a single Thompson cost over $200. In today's money, that's thousands of dollars for a single infantry weapon. And worse, machining that solid steel took endless hours of skilled labor. In a global war where the military suddenly needed millions of weapons overnight, you cannot afford to have a master gunsmith carefully polishing every single trigger. The US was losing the manufacturing race. The Germans had the stamped metal MP40. The British had the crude but effective Sten gun. The US Army Ordnance Department hit the panic button. They needed a gun that was dirt cheap, fired the massive .45 ACP pistol cartridge, and could be pumped out by the millions in weeks, not years. So they didn't go to a traditional gunsmith. They went to General Motors, specifically the Guide Lamp Division, a factory that literally made metal headlights and hubcaps for cars. The engineers there didn't care about making a beautiful weapon. They cared about mass production. They designed the M3 by taking two halves of cheap sheet metal and crudely welding them together right down the middle. There were almost no moving parts. There was no complex safety switch. If you wanted to put the gun on safe, you literally just flipped a metal dust cover down over the ejection port, which locked the bolt in place. The entire gun cost the US government roughly $15 to make. It was a disposable, mass-produced tool of violence. When it hit the front lines, the soldiers hated it. It felt cheap. It looked like a toy. But then, the first real firefights broke out in the ruined villages of Europe, and the soldiers realized something terrifyingly brilliant about this $15 trash can. The Thompson was a great gun, but firing it was like holding a wild animal. It shot at about 700 to 800 rounds per minute. When you pulled the trigger, that heavy .45 caliber recoil would violently push the barrel up toward the sky, spraying bullets everywhere. It was incredibly hard to control. The grease gun was different. It fired at a painfully slow, almost comical rate of about 450 rounds per minute. When you pulled the trigger, it didn't roar. It just went thud, 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 thud. But that slow speed was a massive tactical cheat code. Because it fired so slowly, the weapon barely moved in the shooter's hands. An American GI could point a grease gun at a German trench and keep a perfectly straight, relentless line of heavy .45 caliber fire pinned exactly where he wanted it. It was so incredibly controllable that soldiers realized they didn't even need a semi-automatic switch. If you just tapped the trigger quickly, the heavy bolt moved so slowly that you could effortlessly fire single, highly accurate shots. It was ugly, yes, but in a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled firefight, control is what keeps you alive. However, the first version of the grease gun had a critical, life-threatening flaw. To cock the weapon, the M3 used a weird ratcheting crank handle on the side. In the miserable mud, freezing rain, and absolute filth of the European battlefield, this crank handle was a disaster. It would jam, bend, or completely snap off right in the middle of a firefight, leaving the soldier holding a useless metal tube while the enemy was charging. The Army's solution to this problem was a masterclass in brutal caveman engineering. In 1944, they released the upgraded M3A1. They completely ripped off the fragile crank handle. To cock the new gun, they simply drilled a massive hole directly into the steel bolt inside the ejection port. If a soldier wanted to chamber a round, he literally just flipped open the dust cover, jammed his index finger deep into the greasy steel hole, and yanked the heavy bolt back with his bare hand. It was raw. It was painful if your fingers were freezing, but it was absolutely unbreakable. There was no mechanism left to fail. You could bury the M3A1 in the dirt, kick it, throw it against a wall, and it would still fire. And that rugged, indestructible simplicity caught the attention of the deadliest, most secretive unit in the war, the OSS, the precursor to the modern CIA. The OSS realized that the grease gun's slow rate of fire and heavy subsonic .45 caliber bullet made it the absolute perfect candidate for something much darker than trench warfare. They needed an assassination weapon for covert operatives and the French resistance working deep behind Nazi lines. They took the cheap grease gun and essentially bolted a massive state-of-the-art silencer onto it. They drilled holes directly into the barrel and wrapped it in a massive metal tube packed with wire mesh. When an OSS operative fired the suppressed grease gun, the deafening roar of a .45 caliber gunshot was completely swallowed. The only sound you heard was the heavy metallic clack-clack-clack of the bolt slamming back and forth. Operatives could ambush Nazi patrols in the dead of night, drop 3 men in complete silence, and vanish back into the shadows before anyone even knew they were under attack. The weapon that the regular infantry had laughed at was now striking absolute terror into the hearts of German officers in occupied Europe. The Thompson submachine gun may have won all the glory in the movies, but it was quickly retired after World War II. It was simply too heavy and too expensive for the modern military. But the $15 piece of stamped sheet metal, the ugly duckling, refused to die because it was so small, featuring a retractable wire stock. It could fit almost anywhere. It became the weapon of choice for tank crews who operated in incredibly tight, claustrophobic spaces. The grease gun fought through the freezing mountains of the Korean War. It fought in the sweltering, claustrophobic jungles of Vietnam, where its slow, heavy fire could easily punch through thick jungle foliage that deflected lighter bullets. And incredibly, its service didn't end there. Fast forward to the 1990s, the Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm, American M1. Abrams tanks are rolling across the Iraqi desert. Inside those state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar armored beasts, the crew members weren't carrying high-tech modern assault rifles. They were sitting there with the exact same M3A1 grease guns that their grandfathers had carried into Normandy 50 years earlier. Even elite operators from Delta Force were known to keep them around because of their legendary, unstoppable reliability. The M3 grease gun proves the ultimate rule of military combat. War isn't won by the prettiest weapon, the most expensive engineering, or the most polished wood. War is won by the tool that fires every single time you pull the trigger, no matter how much mud is shoved into it. If you want to uncover the true, uncensored and ruthless stories of military history that they never taught you in school, hit that subscribe button. This is Team Alpha 6. We'll see you on the next mission.